Welcome to episode 170 of the Brainy Business, understanding the psychology of why people buy. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Ingrid Nieuwenhuis, head of science at alpha.one. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. A few weeks ago, I had the honor of being a speaker at Greenbook's IIEX Behavior Conference, an amazing event that brings people together from around the world to talk about behavior and insights and so much more. My piece of this event was doing a live podcast interview with Dr. Ingrid Nieuwenhuis for the session called When Machine Learning Meets Neuroscience. A couple weeks ago, Sam Albert joined me to discuss AI and its role in behavioral science. And this conversation with Ingrid was so fantastic and really building on that. I was delighted when the team at Greenbook said I could share this amazing session from their fantastic conference and our conversation here with you on the Brainy Business. This is the exact audio from that conference, and if you want to see it in video form, it will be shared via my free global community, the Be Thoughtful Revolution, when the episode airs. There is a link to join the Be Thoughtful Revolution within the show notes, as well as links to past episodes, books mentioned on the show, links to Greenbook, IIEX Behavior, and ways to get in touch with Ingrid in the show notes, which are waiting for you within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/170. Those already on the Brainy Business list got a direct link from me in the email you receive every Friday. Not on the list yet? Simply sign up for any freebie at thebrainybusiness.com and you'll be automatically added. The freebie for this episode is the first chapter of my award-winning book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. And if you already have the book, in which case, thank you, you'll also be automatically added to the list when you get your copy of the free PDF companion workbook. Both are housed in our free behavioral economics community called the Be Thoughtful Revolution. There's a link to join that global community in those show notes as well. All right, let's jump right into the session at IIEX Behavior. Hello, everyone. I'm Melina Palmer of the Brainy Business. I'm so excited to be here for this live podcast of When Machine Learning Meets Neuroscience with our amazing guest, Ingrid Nieuwenhuis, who's head of science at alpha.one. We had a chat about pronunciation, so that's my best attempt. Apologies if I butchered it a little bit. So Ingrid, can you tell everyone a little about you, your amazing background in neuroscience and what you do as head of science at alpha.one?
Yes, definitely. Well, first of all, I'm Dutch and we love our vowels to make everyone else very miserable in trying to pronounce our names. So I'm Dutch. I've originally, started in my career as a neuroscientist. So I'm trained as a neuroscientist, got my PhD in neuroscience. And I've always been really interested in where two domains meet. So I actually, was very interested in behavior, but also how does it emerge from the brain? So that's how I got to neuroscience. And I did a whole PhD looking into memory and sleep and how, the whole shebang, and moved to the US in 2010 to do a postdoc there. And at some point, I became a little bit frustrated, I think is the best word, about doing really good neuroscience in academia. But I think this is something we'll touch upon also in industry. To do it really right, you need a lot of different disciplinaries, right? You need to be really good at neuroscience, you need to be good also at statistics, programming. There are so many skills that are important. And it's not always easy to actually work with a multidisciplinary team in academia. It's sort of, you as the scientist, the supervisor, maybe some co-authors, but it's not really a place where you can go deep on different disciplines. So after a while, I thought I would try, life outside of academia. And also because, of course, the timelines in academia from a study until you have a finding is something that is also, was a little bit too slow to my liking. So after that whole academic career, I joined a company called Nielsen Consumer Neuroscience. At the time, it was just acquired. It was a startup where these techniques that I used in my academic career, like EEG and eye tracking, were used to measure consumers' response to all kinds of different marketing material. For instance, TV commercials, packaging, but also concepts, animatic, a whole different, whole broad range of different stimuli that we tested. And my role was really to, help to translate the findings, the science findings to clients, really client facing, interacting, but also make sure the research was robust. After that, I moved to New York and worked at the marketing science department of Facebook and really dived more into digital marketing. And last year, I moved back to the Netherlands after 10 years. It was supposed to be 2 or 3 years in the US, but that's how life works. After 10 years, I moved back to the Netherlands and I joined alpha.one, a company that I already got to know and was really interested in about, because it's a company where we have scientists from many different disciplines, like, engineers, computer vision, but also people that have been in marketing their whole life, neuroscientists, all sort of coming together and working on different products. So that was a long introduction. Sorry about that. On the one hand, we also do similar things as I did at Nielsen, where we apply, these lab-based techniques to help clients find out how well their marketing material is working. But we're also doing, we're currently doing more and more. It was driven by COVID, of course, when the whole participant-based, lab-based research was really tricky. We've been really starting to focus more and more on also applying machine learning techniques and actually, sort of using the stimulus itself to extract all the learnings you can from that using machine learning. So that's what we're currently working on. We have a platform where we can predict what people will look at. So it's like similar to eye tracking, called it predictive eye tracking. And instead of having to, show participants a stimulus like a video or an image, we can actually upload it to our platform and get like a whole heat map of where people will look at just, in a couple of seconds to minutes from a neural network.
Yeah, I think, like you said, you had perhaps a long intro, but it's because you've earned it. You've done such amazing work over your career. And I'm sure there's so many people that have questions for you as we're going. So everybody knows, definitely be putting your questions into the chat box. We'll be trying to address them as we go. And there may be some members of Ingrid's team, maybe that can be chiming in and helping along the way. And so definitely use that chat box and we can be following up with you. So you talked just a little bit about your AI-powered eye tracking platform and how this is doing predictive eye tracking, which I'm guessing for a lot of people, we want to know how it works. And then there's the question of, well, if it's predictive, how close is it? How are you setting it up to where it does align with what a person would actually do? So can you talk a little bit about how that got even built and how you test and track to make sure that it is in line with what people would do? I know that we may think that the eye tracking of the participants would change quickly over time, so you'd have to be constantly updating. I'm guessing that's not actually accurate. So tell a little bit about how expose.io works.
Yes, definitely. So it is a technique based on deep learning. So deep learning is something that has become more and more, popular. The older machine learning based solutions were really based on people sort of trying to extract features from an image, right? So finding areas with high contrast by defining certain rules, finding faces by defining rules. But over the past, 10, 20, 15, I don't know exactly how long, but it's pretty recent. There have been what we call deep neural networks that are based very loosely, I should say, on the brain. So these are networks that have many different layers. And instead of having to tell the the network, what the rules are. If you have a lot of data, the network can figure out these rules themselves. So what you need to train this network is a lot of labeled data. And in our case, we use a lot of, eye tracking or mouse tracking is very similar, heat maps. So we have a lot of heat maps where we know where people were looking at. So you have these, gold truth areas, these blobs that probably everyone who has worked with eye tracking is quite familiar with. So we know what people will look at. These have been acquired for over 10,000 of images, over thousands of participants. Of course, I'm saying we do it without measuring participants, but that is after the network is trained, right? So to train a network like this, you have to first have a lot of data where people have actually, looked at things, where in an image where people look at, and using that, you can actually train this deep neural net. It's a GAN network or convolutional neural network. If people are interested, maybe we can somewhere post that in the chat too. And then, of course, on the website, you can read more about that as well. But when you have this big data set where you have all this labeled data where people actually looked at, you can actually get the network to predict, to just sort of create so that's also it's a generative network, to create a heat map that is very similar to a real heat map. And we've done a lot of validation, of course, to make sure and to also measure how similar these are. And of course, there are a gazillion measures to quantify that. We're using this area under the curve measure, and using that. And area under the curve just means it takes both the false positives and false. Again, I'm sorry, maybe I'm boring or losing some people, but the people that are into machine learning will definitely want to know how we validate it, because of course you can always come up with a high number depending on what type of validation you do. But as said, area under the curve, it takes both false positives and false negatives into account. So it really measures if where you predict that attention is going, if it really goes there, right? You're not missing anything, but also you're not just creating blobs or areas that you think are, grabbing attention while they aren't. And that's sort of close to, it's like 0.87. Currently, we're continue to, improve and train the network. So this will likely go up over time. But already it's actually really close to the real data, to the real heat maps.
I love all of it. And I think it's good to get into, like you said, the nitty gritty of what it does and people that might have gotten bored. Maybe it helps them to know of stuff that they should be looking at. Maybe there's a reason to be hiring experts.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, again, getting back to the whole interdisciplinary thing, right? So I work with my colleague who's actually built and trained this network, is a PhD in machine learning, in computer vision. So yeah, I interact a lot with people that even, can say this in much more complex terms. But yeah, I think this is sort of on the high level what it is and how it works.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet with this audience, you had very little that even got remotely bored. So it's really fascinating stuff. With you coming on to alpha.one as head of science, I was reading, a press release announcing your arrival that says you were charged with developing a platform that quantifies brand value generated by marketing to help determine the strengths of an ad and their weaknesses via machine learning, which you've talked about a little bit on, the machine learning itself and how that works. Can you expand about how this can be quantified with the brand value that's developed by marketing, of which I know there's a great study from what you've done with Heineken. Maybe it's somebody else that you would want to expand on, but can you talk a little bit about how this is important for marketing and branding?
Yeah, exactly. Now, branding is, of course, very important. Also, when we were doing this whole lab-based research, one of the top things that we always give feedback to our clients to is how well a brand comes through, how well an ad is branded. We know that these things, even in, online advertising, where people may think it's more about short-term results, we know that in the long term, to build value, you have to build your brand. And therefore, this is something that also, as a memory researcher, that's how I started. As a little anecdote, I will never forget the first time I went shopping in the States after I just moved. And I couldn't make a decision of what to choose because I had all these brands there. and I had no knowledge about any of them. And I really realized how, this whole mental representation of what a brand is and what it means, and just helps you just to go about in your life. And if you don't have that information, you're really lost. So building a brand and being able to communicate your brand in your packaging, in your ads, is so essential for successful marketing and for successful branding in general. So yeah, we are actually working on, and that's also something that I really like at alpha.one. We're a startup, so we're still, we're working on a whole sort of different types of products to figure out what is resonating with clients. So on the one hand, what we're doing on our machine learning expose-based platform is really to automatically being able to extract all branding features in a stimulus. So what people already can do on the platform, and our clients are doing often, and also in the blog I wrote on the Heineken example, I showed some examples there as well, where you can actually draw an area of interest on parts of say, a frame in an ad or a still, and you can quantify how much attention is actually going to the brand, right? So say you are creating a banner ad and you want to, make sure your brand is coming through. You can do an A/B test, have several different versions, and then if you want to decide which one is really, where is the attention going most to the brand, you can actually draw a little area of interest around it in the different versions of the ad, and just see, before you have to do any A/B testing, already like purely based. So this is actually something, maybe we should talk a little bit about this, what we are predicting, right? Because I said attention, and of course, eye tracking is both driven by the stimulus, what we call exogenous attention or bottom-up attention. And of course, it also is dependent on what a consumer is actually interested in, what we call more endogenous or top-down attention, says the psychologist in me. So what we are really predicting with Expose is really the stimulus-driven attention. So differences in contrast, differences in color, but also things that our brain is wired to go to some type of stimulus like faces, right? We are social. I don't have to tell you this, of course, probably no one in the audience, but we are so wired for social interaction that our eyes are just unconsciously drawn to faces and are attracted to it. So these kind of things we can predict with the platform. So to go back to the example of the A/B test, if you change something in the color contrast, or if you change just the location even of things, because it's also a very relative process where if you move something here, it can also affect how people are looking at something else, right? If you have a whole blue and then something pops out. Anyway, it's a very contextual thing. So, and the reason why I'm saying that is that it's hard to, sometimes people think, oh, I can sort of guess where people will look at, especially and of course, when you are creative and have a lot of experience, you probably have a better feel for this. But we've seen very surprising examples where creatives were pre-testing their ads and they were very surprised with what they saw. And also with small changes, you can really change, how something is drawing attention. So yeah, so this is something, and again, to go back to the whole brand building, using this, you can measure attention to brand name, to brand logos, etc. And then another thing, which is more in a very early stage, but we're working on that, and I'm super excited about it, is another method where we're actually quantifying brand value, which will be something also purely online, but where we will also use participant inputs. So we're sort of, because of course you cannot capture everything with an algorithm. Some things are, just the example I already gave about top-down attention, what you as a consumer are interested in is something that is just hard to grab with an algorithm. And there are other examples as well. So as a company, we're also, not just focusing on purely machine learning, but also on getting online participants. And one of the products we're currently building is a product that is measuring brand value. So yeah, it's quite different than the Expose platform. But on both our how you say it, on both our endeavors, we are really focusing on being able to get measurements on brand, because that is what our clients need, and that is what we get asked for, and that is also, what we're focusing on.
Yeah, I think, and just to take a step further, where you were talking about the small changes that can make such a big difference, which is one of my favorite things about the behavioral sciences, right? Just these little tiny things, and that you think, like you're saying. So I bet, going to the Heineken example, anybody who was creating that ad probably thought, hey, we put a can in the foreground. It's the only thing really on the table. It's green. Everything else is kind of a neutral tone. People have to be seeing it. And you just assume that that's what's happening. But as you explain in your article, that just a tiny crop, like zooming in, because there was couch behind him of the person who's sitting at the table. And by just moving it a tiny bit, like 10%, that zoom, making a difference. I think the lift went from, 3% attention to 6% attention on the Heineken can. Yeah. And like you said, changing just the color of what was around the can, making a difference. And you think you want to have the streaming, the televisions in the background, and that's important. But there was just a tiny little red box, like you said. So contrast is going to draw our attention. And when a lot of the background is neutral, and there's the tiny, kind of little live from the news, the logo, which you're used to seeing, right? So you don't even think about how that might be drawing attention, but removing this teeny tiny little box that seems like it shouldn't do anything, it's just part of the TV, also had a significant lift on the attention to the brand in a way that's not overbearing, right? Because I would be concerned if I was on the, agency that's working for Heineken or with the brand, because you also don't want to be beating people over the head with your brand, because they're going to tune out and go, ugh, stop showing me your logo. I get who this is for. So there's this balance of, I don't know if you have an exact percentage to say, you don't want to go over 25, 30% attention for however long because it detracts from the story. I'm sure there's some, whether you already know that or you're working on finding that out, but going from 3 to 6% when it's just part of the scene can make a really big difference for, that familiarity bias, helping us to feel like we're smart when it ends up being about Heineken, without feeling like we were forced into knowing who it was about, right?
Yeah, no. And I mean, you're making really good points, because there's always a balance between the story you want to tell and the emotion you want to create and how you want to draw people in. And on the other hand, you have to make the brand really a integral part of that, right? And it's very interesting. I've, of course, sat a lot around the table with both the creative party and the brand managers. And sometimes there's a bit of, friction is maybe too big of a word depending on the teams, but there is different priorities that all have to be met. And you want to have an engaging story, but you also want to make sure, and in the digital, when things are digital, or with so many ads being digital, people may not even see the whole story, right? In reality, and even if we want this ad to go viral, most ads are just sort of seen very short, just a few seconds. And if your story has to build up, and there's no brand in the first few seconds, it's really almost a wasted impression, right? You're paying for it, but you don't get much in return. So being able to, with small tweaks, and you already gave some examples, like the color of the table, which is something that doesn't detract from the story, right? It's so subtle, but you can choose, if you as a creative know, let's choose and I don't remember what color. I know I tried several different colors just to sort of see how does that affect, but it was surprising, right? I thought probably a red table for a green can is going to give me the most attention, but actually it wasn't. So these are also things that you cannot always predict. And also the logo that you were mentioning is something we talk a lot about with clients as well. You have sometimes attention vampires. something that you just don't realize is grabbing attention actually is. As someone who's running in the back of a screen, which was sort of a fun little thing that wasn't super important, sucking up all the attention, or, a logo that was sort of meant to make clear it was like a live TV, the example I gave in the blog, where it was a very strong contrast logo, and it wasn't important for that logo to be so much grabbing attention, right? So just sort of making it smaller or different, you can really increase the percentage that goes to the brand. And it may sound very small, right? Maybe from 3 to 6%, so what? But we know that, if you go with a conversion just from 2 to 2.2%, right, that can already have a huge impact. So just increasing the chance that people will see your brand, it's a numbers game. So even going from 3 to 6% can have a measurable effect on how successful your ad is. Even if people don't remember seeing it, it's still, your brain is sort of absorbing all this information automatically. It's creating these whole associative networks. And if your brand is in there, it just it gets a really consolidated impression. So I think that really good creative agencies often are able to integrate a brand into a story in a way that it isn't intrusive, and the brand can really be the hero in the story. And we see that those ads are often also sales-wise the most effective, right? Are really producing the most impact because people like watching it, they're engaged with the story, and at the same time, this brand is there all the time and really, helping these brands being built and strengthened and become top of mind for the consumer when they see it.
I love that term, attention vampires. It's got such a good visual to it that you totally get it. And It made me think, I feel like that was probably a moment where people are doing the chat of like, attention vampires. I love it, right? If I was as an attendee, I would have done that. So as that reminder, if you have questions for Ingrid or the team or anything, definitely do put those into the chat box as we're getting close to wrapping up here. I have at least one more question, which you've talked about the benefit and really the reason you got into the applied side versus in academia is by being able to have these multifaceted people with different backgrounds coming together. It's one of my favorite things about the behavioral sciences as well, just that diverse background. And so what sort of strategy do you either have of what you're doing at alpha.one, or just recommendations for those that are listening and watching us right now about building interdisciplinary teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love it. It's because I'm so passionate about it. So, and it's also something that people don't always, everyone is like, oh, interdisciplinary is so important. But then I look in practice, and I've worked with many different companies, it's so often a group of people that know each other from some sort of background. So in a very organic way, you often get very similar people in a company, similar people on teams. So you have to really work on actually creating multidisciplinary teams. It's not something that accidentally always happens, right? And it's actually also hard because sometimes, depending on your background, you can speak totally different. It feels like you're speaking totally different languages. I've had the, great experience at Facebook where I was in a team with all people with PhDs in statistics. And they, sometimes I was using my terms that we use for statistical testing in psychology. And they were like, sort of looking at me, and I'm like, well, this is statistics, right? I thought you guys had a PhD in statistics. And, it's also the difference in terminology, and also being open to the fact that if you have people that have a very different background and a very different knowledge set, you can get this 1 is 3 phenomenon, which, I'm super excited about. I've already, when I started, I was sort of interested in behavior, but I wanted to understand how it emerges from the brain. So I've always really liked this place between different expertises, right, where psychology and biology come together. I think statistics is really an area that is so important and not always present in many companies. People with really deep expertise. And the reason why it's so important is that so much of what we're currently doing is this deep, big data. And you see it in academia with the reproducibility crisis, as they call it, where people, where it's very hard to reproduce findings because sometimes also statistical models that have been used, or, sort of all the things that you do to the data to get, and I get it, right? I've been there too. You need to have a significant result. Otherwise you don't have, also at journals, it's hard to publish without this. So you sort of, look into the data sometimes a bit for interesting results. But then, of course, you get these issues with reproducibility. So anyway, to get back to your question, how do you get these themes is to first be open to it, right? And realize that it helps, and to realize that to be willing to put in the work, right? To understand each other and learn each other's jargon and learn each other's language. And when you take that time, actually often really cool things automatically emerges, and it becomes really fulfilling and rewarding for everyone in it. I've seen that happen as well, right? There's this little bit of work you have to put in there, but when you're at the same page, then you can, I also really enjoy, working with, as I was saying, the PhD level computer science, where we're then talking about how you have different models to detect automatically all kinds of things, and and how to implement this in a Google Cloud to make it able to do it all in parallel. And that's something may seem very simple to me. And they're actually, well, do you know that to do this, you have to actually spin up some extra GPUs and there's overhead. So therefore, anyway, I'm learning a lot. So you have to be willing to, sometimes put in the work to get there. And as a tip, I think being willing as a company to invest in people with skills in statistics and programming and engineering, and those people are often hard to get because there are so many fields where they're really wanted, but to have people contribute to the products that are built, I think is essential. But also on the other hand, I've seen machine learning experts that are not often making use of all the things in neuroscience we know about the brain and how the brain is sort of solved solutions. And I think some really big breakthroughs in computer science or in computer vision have actually been inspired by neuroscience, right? So it's also there on the overlap between computer science and neuroscience, especially with this whole deep learning. There's so much that we can learn from each other if we're just, open to it.
Yeah, such great points. I know when I talk to clients about this, I always will say either, for the one piece being just because you didn't think about it or acknowledge it doesn't mean it's not happening. So having a diverse team is really important, and making sure you can think about as much as possible before you go launch. I think, your software definitely helps with that as well. And then also, even if we're saying completely different things, we can both be right. Even if we're not saying the same thing, there's a lot going on at any given time.
And often we're both wrong. And by talking to each other, we're actually figuring out something that neither of us, that's what I mean by the 1 and 1 is 3, right? Because often you need the input from both, all the expertises to actually get it right. So that's why it's not that you're both, who is right. I think it's often the case, like, how can we together find the real truth, because often the real truth is really hidden where everything comes together.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Well, thank you again so much to Ingrid Nieuwenhuis for joining me today for this live podcast talking about when machine learning meets neuroscience. I know I love the conversation. I'm sure everyone else did as well. Such an important step for all the fields to be looking at, and just again, really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope everyone else did as well. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you again to the team at Greenbook for letting me be part of the IIEX Behavior Conference to interview Dr. Ingrid Nieuwenhuis and share this fascinating conversation with you on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? While we didn't get into it too much in the conversation, I find the idea of memory and sleep and the impact it has on businesses and brands and consumers to be so intriguing. Perhaps I will need to have Ingrid back on the show or come into the Be Thoughtful Revolution to talk about this with you in more depth. Would you like to chat with her and ask some questions in the group? Join now no matter what. It's totally free, and there's a link in the show notes. Let me know, and we will see if we can persuade her to join us for a chat. As a reminder, last week's guest, Dr. Troy Campbell, is coming in to do a lesson on how to Disneyify anything and then do a Q&A with you within the Be Thoughtful Revolution on September 29th. Again, links for the Be Thoughtful Revolution and the Greenbook team and getting in touch with Ingrid are all waiting for you within those show notes at thebrainybusiness.com/170. And as we close out the show, I want to thank everyone from around the world who's ordered my book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, which I'm honored to say is now award-winning as a finalist in 2 categories of the International Book Awards. A special shout out to everyone who's been sharing about What Your Customer Wants on social media and writing those amazing 5-star reviews. If you haven't done so yet, would you do me a personal favor and leave a review of the book on Amazon, Goodreads, or wherever else you write reviews? More reviews make it more likely to have the book promoted by those site algorithms so others can find it and see that it's a fit for them. And for all the reasons, it would be so appreciated by me. Thank you in advance for taking the time. I hope you're loving the book, or perhaps hearing about the International Book Awards has put you over the edge and you're ordering your copy right now, in which case I can't wait to hear about your thoughts once you've had a chance to dig in. Come share it with me on all the socials. You can find me as The Brainy Biz or just Melina Palmer on LinkedIn. And one last reminder, if you haven't yet checked out that free PDF companion workbook, all 111 pages of it are waiting for you inside our free global community, the Be Thoughtful Revolution. Links for all are waiting for you in the show notes. And thank you again to Dr. Ingrid Nieuwenhuis and the Greenbook team for making the episode possible. It was a delight to be part of the IIEX Behavior Conference and reshare that content here on the Brainy Business. Join me next week for another fascinating episode of the Brainy Business Podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.